Welcome everybody to today's DeFord lecture series. We're very happy today to have Anita Marshall talking with us about accessible geoscience field experiences. We're going to hear a little bit more about Anita and her research from Julia Clark in just a second. As all of you know, the DeFord lecture series is a long-standing tradition here in the Department of Geological Sciences going back to the 1940s, originally known as technical sessions, and it's been a venue for having outstanding scientists both within the department and the wider community present their results since that time. It's named after Ronald Kennison DeFord, who was a professor in the department for many, many years, also a graduate advisor, and who was very instrumental in organizing and running technical sessions during his time at the University of Texas. So again, we're very happy today to have Anita Marshall speaking with us. And to tell us a little bit more about Anita is Julia Clark. Before I forget.
And thank you everyone who's like bright and ready to hear an excellent talk by Dr. Anita Marshall. I just want to give her a brief intro. She's going to tell us more about her background in this talk today. She is a lecturer and a researcher at the University of Florida at Gainesville. And although she has two research areas, her primary one is in geoscience education and a second in passion for volcanoes. Today, she's going to be talking to us about making field experiences and field courses accessible. And this is something I'm really looking forward to learning more about, the cutting edge research that Dr. Marshall has participated in over her career. And she's also hopefully going to tell us a little bit about the nonprofit that she's executive director of, the International Association for Geoscience Diversity. So with that, let's get to the fun. Let's get to the talk. Thank you so much, Dr. Marshall, for being here today.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I spent all day today doing pre-K and kindergarten outreach. First time in 3 years. I forgot how exhausted that makes me. So bear with me if I get a little fumbly when I get through some of these slides.
We'll understand it's been a long day and look forward to it.
Yes, I dramatically underestimated the effort involved in that. All right, well, thank you so much for that nice introduction and for inviting me to speak to your department about a topic that I am very passionate about. So today I'm going to be talking about accessible geoscience field experiences. So making field work and field education accessible for people with disabilities, but everyone. So I am from University of Florida in the Department of Geological Sciences, and I'm also the executive director of the 501c3 nonprofit, the International Association for Geoscience Diversity, and that is a nonprofit focused on improving access and inclusion to the geosciences for people with disabilities at all career stages, students and professionals. Well, if I can get my slide to go. All right, a little bit about me. I think we hit most of this. Besides the things that we just talked about, I'm also a member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and I have a physical disability and chronic fatigue. So DEI issues are very important to me. They are both my research area and sort of a personal passion for many reasons. So this is something that I care deeply about. And so I put a lot of my energy and research efforts into trying to make the geosciences a place that everybody can feel like they belong. So basic outline of what we're going to talk about today, the need for inclusive, accessible fieldwork, some of the social barriers, which often aren't discussed when we talk about making fieldwork accessible, social barriers, and then some of the innovative approaches that can happen to make field courses more accessible, some of the interesting ideas that other people have done, some of my projects, and then some closing thoughts. I'm going to leave lots of time for Q&A at the end because I think that is really important. Hang on real quick. I'm going to stop my share and start it again because I know I'm going to have one slide that misbehaves if I don't. I'm going to catch it before we get there. All right. trial and error. Okay. All right, so a little bit of background information first. So let's talk about disability in STEM in general. You know, we'll talk most of this, the rest of this lecture about the geosciences, but in terms of STEM fields, people with disabilities are significantly underrepresented. And the irony here is that people with disabilities show more of an interest in STEM fields coming out of high school than the general population. They're actually, if you poll high school students, which has been done, that's where this information is coming from, about the disciplines that they would like to major in as they're going off to college, students with disabilities show a higher interest in STEM disciplines than than the general population. So that's cool. You know, roughly 20% of the population identifies as having a disability, but 22% of people who identified as disabled coming out of high school said they would really like a career in STEM. Now, the disappointing thing is that once they get through 4 years at a university, the number of people graduating with a STEM degree who also identify as having a disability drops to 10%. So somewhere during those undergrad college years, we've lost quite a few of those students out of STEM. If you jump up to the master's level, the number of STEM degree holding students who identify as having a disability drops to 6%. And if you jump up to the PhD level, it is an abysmal 2%. So clearly, there are some significant barriers that are not being addressed for this population. We're losing a lot of really great people. So before we dig into that a little bit more and the geosciences specifically, I wanted to talk a little bit about why we go to the field. This is a question I get a lot when I talk about my research outside of the geosciences, because a lot of other STEM disciplines don't have this heavy emphasis on field work. They don't really understand why we're so keen on it. So you know, most of us, if we're asked why we take our students to the field, we're going to list the academic benefits: direct experience to reinforce classroom concepts, problem solving in spatially and conceptually complex settings, and learning field skills and data collection techniques that are often kind of hard to teach in the classroom. All of those are really great reasons to go to the field. Some of the reasons we don't often talk about are the social and affective benefits, things beyond just learning. It turns out that being in the field and conducting field work is a critical factor in forming identity as a geoscientist. For many students, field work is what first sparks that feeling of, I am a geoscientist, not just I am a student. So that's pretty important. It also develops strong social bonds with colleagues and mentors. This is very important for long-term success in any discipline. If the field is where you're doing most of the social networking in your department, having inaccessible field experiences becomes an additional barrier for student success. You know, they're out there in the field, growing their bonds with people that'll be future colleagues, with faculty that can be letter writers and recommenders. And if they're missing out on all of that, that's a pretty big deal. The other interesting thing is that studies have shown that participating in fieldwork improves learning outcomes in future academic courses. So beyond the course that was happening in the field, students apply themselves more after fieldwork. They're basically more engaged and more invested in their coursework after fieldwork. So those are all some really great reasons to go to the field. But of course, there's always a but, right? Students with disabilities are often excused or given alternative assignments that don't provide the same level of inquiry-based collaborative learning their peers receive in the field. This is a real problem and a huge source of attrition. So it's not just that they're missing out on the academic content from the field, they're also missing out on all that network building, identity formation, all the things that help long-term success for students. So as I mentioned before, roughly 20% of US college students identify as having some type of disability. I want to pause here and acknowledge the fact that almost all the work that is done in the accessibility sphere in academia is focused entirely on students, and for obvious reasons. But I want to acknowledge that there are disabled faculty members that are also part of the geoscience community that face significant barriers as well. And I could do an entire talk on that. But we're talking primarily about student experiences here, but I want you to keep it in the back of your mind that these exclusions, these challenges and these barriers don't end when students graduate. They follow many people with disabilities throughout their entire career in the geosciences. So one of the other important things in terms of the need for inclusive field work, science disciplines with a strong emphasis in learning in the field or lab are the ones that have the lowest graduates with disabilities of all the STEM disciplines. So basically the ones with inaccessible environments are, surprise, surprise, the ones that don't have graduates with disabilities. For the geosciences specifically, less than 5% of geoscience bachelor's degree holders identify as having a disability. That is an abysmally small number when you consider that 20% of US college students have a disability. The lack of accommodations and viable pathways for students with disabilities impacts the recruitment and retention of all marginalized groups. I make this point in every talk I give, no matter what it's on. Disability inclusion is such a critical and often missing piece when we're talking about how to recruit and retain students with diverse identities. Disability cuts across all other identity types. And if you are excluding people with disabilities, you're excluding more than that, right? You're excluding people who have multiply marginalized identities, and that's awful, right? So there's so many really important reasons that we need to think very carefully about creating accessible and inclusive pathways through our degree programs. So before we get into the nuts and bolts about how to make the field itself accessible, I also want to acknowledge that field work and the mystique around it creates exclusionary environments for people with disabilities long before the first field trip. Things like if all of your brochures and promotional videos and all the things you use to recruit students have people hanging off of cliffs and climbing through caves and rappelling into active volcanoes, that's very cool and it will attract a very specific type of people. But if students with disabilities don't see anything in that promotional material that shows that there is a way forward for them through your degree, it's a huge turnoff and they will self-select a different discipline, right? So you may not even get them in the front door. You may not even get a chance to talk about retention because you can't recruit them in the first place. So there was a really interesting paper that came out a few years ago that also showed that denied accommodations in intro-level courses due to perceived fit was also a huge source of attrition. So basically in our intro level courses, because many faculty have this idea of geosciences as these hale and hearty, rugged explorers, people that don't fit that persona are often seen as not a good fit for the major. And what was happening in some programs was that faculty were denying disability accommodations because they saw students with disabilities as not really a good fit for the discipline. So they're not even getting through their first intro level class before they're meeting significant social barriers to their participation. So social stigma against those that haven't had or can't have traditional field experience is rampant. And it's not just inside the degree programs, it also carries over when they start trying to get a job afterwards. I've had employers tell me to my face that if students don't have extensive field experience, they won't even look at their CV. And it doesn't matter what other really great experience they might have. It's this whole obsession that we have about building our entire discipline off of these sort of adventure style field experiences. So all of that is leads to people leaving the discipline or not even joining in the first place. Okay, so let's start little. If you are running your own course, there are small things you can do to retrofit a pre-existing course to make it just a little bit more inclusive and not, quite as exclusionary. So one of the most important is the one I put right up at the top. You can articulate a willingness to adapt field experiences before being asked. I cannot tell you how important this is. It doesn't matter if in your head you're saying, oh, if somebody comes up to me and asks, I'll modify it for them. Most people are not going to ask out of the blue unless you prime that pump, right? So you need to articulate a willingness to do that so that students feel comfortable approaching you. Providing alternative ways of interacting with the landscape is another great way to promote inclusion. Tactile maps, 3D prints, audio and visual instructions for things that are going on in the field, all of those enhance accessibility. And then, an obvious one that requires a little bit more effort is to select accessible field locations. There are I know a lot of geoscientists don't like to hear this, but there are very few geology concepts that you need to show an undergrad that absolutely requires some, 4-mile hike up into the mountains that, there's probably a road cut that shows something pretty good. So I always encourage people to think if there's any better place, a more accessible place that you can teach the same concepts. Right. So as we go along, I want you to think of, what other kind of little things you can do that might, create a more inclusive culture. Okay. So that's the setting and sort of little things you can do at an individual retrofitting, manner. So now I'd like to talk about a few innovative approaches and some of my research, primarily just to get the ideas flowing. It's not about copying what other people have done, although that is a great idea and some of this stuff really works. But it's primarily to get your ideas thinking innovatively, right? And not just thinking about retrofitting existing experiences, but designing experiences accessibly from the ground up. All right. So I'm going to talk about 2 examples that used technology. So the first one is the Enabling Remote Activity project at the Open University in the UK. The OU is a fully online university with one big exception. Natural science degrees still require capstone field courses. So because they're a fully online university, they have a higher than average percentage of students with disabilities because online programs are very attractive for many reasons to students with disabilities. But that meant that then they had to get these students to the capstone field courses. So what they did is they developed methods of using telecommunications equipment to improve access in the field, basically using video cameras that were streaming back to computers and laptops and allowing students to get, as close as they physically could, and then bridging that last access gap with technology. So this was something that they were retrofitting their existing field courses to be a little more accessible. Another project that was designed from the ground up with accessibility in mind was a Geopass project a few years ago. This was my PhD research. This was in 2016 and 2017, engaging students in inclusive field experiences. And this kind of took the kit from the ERA projects and pushed it a little further. We had iPads set up on a wireless network, so a portable wireless network that we had up on towers across the field site, and that enabled students to share digital data, photos, and videos from more and less accessible locations, and they were able to build a collaborative map working from all these different locations. So everybody was putting in the same amount of work and doing the same amount of geology research. They were just doing it from places with different levels of accessibility. So this required very careful site selection. We had to select sites that had a good range of accessibility, places that we could drive right up to outcrops if we needed to, places that were an easy paved, walk or roll from the van. And then, field sites that if we had people that were interested in hiking, they could hike out and get data in those more rugged and difficult to reach locations. So places with a good mix are ideal for this kind of approach. Okay, so it's a little hard to explain how we make this work. So what I've realized is if I just play this little 2-minute video, these videos really, this video does a really great job of giving you an idea of how this works. And then we can talk about this a little bit in the discussion after I wrap up with the next few slides.
Remote collaboration uses teamwork and technology to enable students in different locations to collaborate on learning activities in the field.
Today we're using a local wireless network to connect up students that are spread across this site. So on the local network we've got video streaming between the iPads, we've got photographs that can be shared, and we're using walkie-talkies to keep people in audio.
2 approaches to remote collaboration were used during the course of the project. At the first field site, student teams worked at different locations and collected data to build a collaborative structural map of the area.
The area that we chose along the old railway track was an ideal location. Here we were able to use the railroad, the old rock canyons that were cut out for all of the students, mobile and less mobile, to come along and put their hands on the outcrop, able to use technology that I've just seen for the first time in the field, really, at such a general level, dealing with the iPads, measuring dip and strike, taking photographs, communicating between each other's, groups by the lakeshore, groups on the road, all working in unison. Very, very good indeed.
While the road provided access to some outcrops, the combination of rock and bog made the rest of the field site far less accessible. This is where mixed ability groupings really shine.
If the sheep can do it, so can I.
That's what I'm thinking.
Through the use of wearable cameras and tablets, these students share their experiences with a first-person vantage point of fieldwork in this challenging terrain.
The rain's like ice daggers.
Another location pushed the idea of access through technology even further. With no accessible route to the field site and windy conditions, the base team would have to stay inside the vans for communication to work effectively. And their only means to conduct field work would be through the remote link with their teammates.
Larger boulders at the bottom, followed by thinning and silty material in the middle, and then back to larger. Are you seeing that?
That makes sense too, because as the glacier retreated, there was all the fluvial activity from like the outwash plain.
Is there anything you'd like us to
Through the use of streaming video and photo sharing, teams were able to work together in real time to study the geology of a location that would have traditionally excluded participation for students with mobility limitations.
All right, so that gives you a little bit of idea on how this technology approach works. So regardless of whether you've gone sort of what I call analog style and you're doing accessibility through picking accessible field sites that everybody can get to and fully participate in the first place, or whether you're going high tech and using things like live streaming, wireless, communication, there are 5 inclusive practices that all of these field courses have. So if you take a bunch of these accessible field courses and you evaluate them, there are 5 big things. And one of the things I like about these principles is that it really doesn't matter what kind of underrepresented group you're working with. These are really great principles to build an inclusive program on. So the first one is the use of population-specific theory and research to inform practice. That means that you understand the basic ideas and theories behind research on and about those people. For example, you know, I do a lot of research in disability theory, and that directly informs my approach to my field courses, because you never want to use what's called the charity model, that, oh, we're building this field course because we're so good and you're so needy, right? You want more of an equity model instead. So the second one is to foster students' bonds to each other and a sense of belonging to the class or the group. This is really important for engagement in the activities that are going on in the field. If students don't feel like they belong, if they feel like, they're an outsider in some way, they're just not going to apply themselves to the learning activities, and they're not going to get all those affective and social benefits. The third one is to engage all students as active learners. So make sure that nobody is just on the sidelines watching, that even if they're participating through, say, an iPad, they are actively engaged in what's going on in the field. They're part of the decision-making team. They're part of the data collection team. They're analyzing things. They're doing something, right? If it was all about just watching people do field work, you could just have them stay home and watch documentaries, right? So it's all about active learning. The fourth thing is to create messages of achievement and positive change and growth. It's important that as these field courses develop, students are part of building this momentum through the course of, here's what we've learned, here's what the challenges that we've worked through, and here are the results. So always focusing on the progress and what they've been able to accomplish in the field. And the fifth one is to empower advocates for systemic change throughout the broader geoscience community. So if you've done everything right in those first four, number 5 will follow naturally. People will take the ideas that they learned in that field course, and they'll spread those to the rest of your department and the rest of your institution. And if they go to graduate school someplace else, they'll take those ideas with them. And, what's interesting is that students that have participated in these past field courses often will have stories about going back to their departments and demanding better from their departments, more accessible field courses, more, inclusive learning environments, because they know it can happen now. And so now they want to see it happen in their own communities. Okay, so real quick, I want to talk about some of my current projects because I want to leave lots of time for Q&A. So if you watch that video and you had the thought of, wow, that's a really great approach, but I'll bet that costs quite a bit of money to get all that tech. Yeah, we heard that a lot. So so we put in a grant to NSF with that pitch, and this was the result: the Library of Inclusive Field Technology, or what I call the LIFT kit. So the LIFT kit is a library of tech tools that you can borrow from me to make your field courses more accessible. The idea here is that you would contact me, you would tell me a little bit about your access need, basically the problem you're trying to solve, how many students are involved, and I can mix and match the equipment that we have and design a solution, and then walk you through how to use that stuff in an accessible and inclusive way, right? Basically using those tech tools in a way that fosters belonging and inclusion and doesn't cause further isolation. So we have lots of really great toys that we're adding all the time to that kit. So my big project, my academic baby, is the Geospace Planetary Field Course. It launches in May after pandemic delays. We are wildly behind schedule, but our first course is launching May 30th. We've already selected our cohort. We have 15 amazing students from all over the US that are going to come and participate in this fully accessible field course with a planetary theme. This is unique in 2 aspects. One, it centers the disabled experience, and what I mean by that is that this course is designed by and for people with disabilities. Half the PIs on the project identify as disabled, and more than half the student participants are also disabled. So this is a course that is informed not just by academic theory and prior research, but our own passion for making the field someplace we love to go accessible for everyone. One of the big challenges where we're really stretching ourselves with Geospace is that on the examples that I just showed you, we're using technology to bridge the access gap, but everybody is still physically present somewhere on or near the field site. For Geospace, we have a few students who are participating entirely remotely. They're not coming to Arizona with us. They're going to participate from their homes. And we are going to see if we can make this accessible, inclusive, technology-based field course work for people who can't even travel to a field course. Will this work? We're going to find out. I have high hopes. I'm very excited. And I'm sure after this summer, I will have a lot to say about what we learned and how we accomplished, how we pulled off this field course. So that brings up a question that a lot of people have. Why planetary geology? Besides the obvious that nobody is doing really a planetary geology field course that we knew about. But there are some really great reasons why. For one thing, planetary analogs make excellent places to teach geology fundamentals. There's a reason that we use these places to better understand processes on other planets. They're often places that have really great basic geology that we can teach our students. The other thing, one of the big draws for me when I was designing Geospace was that geology on other planets is inaccessible to everyone, right? Nobody's on Mars walking around, right? So the mindset of working through accessibility challenges as a natural part of the workflow is perfect for creating inclusive collaborative experiences. So we're basically using NASA mission style approaches to each day's field challenges. And we're going to work through that in accessibility as collaborative teams. And we're going to figure out how to get the data we need to get using the tools at hand and our creativity. And the students are going to be an integral part of working through access challenges to get the data that we need to get. So very excited about that. And then planetary geology uses technology to explore from a distance and gives us the chance to teach digital data collection and exploration, which is very relevant to many geoscience careers. So we feel like it will be very beneficial and very useful for our students. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up there because I want lots of time for Q&A. I could, I wasn't quite sure what all to talk about, but I want to hear your questions on this. So, closing thoughts, more options for accessible experiences are needed. There just aren't enough, and there's a real demand out there. If accessible field courses are not available in your department, field work should not be a requirement for degree completion, full stop. No waffling on this. If you don't have a fully accessible route to your degree, you need to rethink things, right? Because basically you're telling people with disabilities, you will not get this degree. And I can't tell you how many students that I have talked to that changed their degrees their junior years because there was some element of their geology degree that the department would not work with them on, and they had to change degrees at the last minute. So this is a huge problem. There are other ways of gaining valuable geoscience experience, and we should not look down on students that have experience in things like lab work and coding and data modeling and all these really relevant, very hireable skills just because they haven't been in the field. And then, last little plug, disabled faculty and professionals exist, and we need to be empowered to create and adapt programs that work for disabled people. There are back in the old disability rights days, the slogan that they were chanting as they were changing themselves to buses and everything else trying to get the ADA pass was nothing about us without us. So, involve people with disabilities when you're trying to make, decision on how to move forward on making your discipline more accessible. And you will get such a wellspring of experience and knowledge and understanding on this topic that can be incredibly valuable. So I have my contact information down there at the bottom. Feel free to reach out to me for follow-up or questions. I'm on Twitter at Baking Soda Volcano. Geospace is going to be tweeting out as we move through our field course at Geospace UF. And then the IAGD is at Accessible Geo. So with that, I will quit talking and take your questions. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Anita. That was wonderful. That was very, very interesting.